So we're back in the gym again, obviously. I don't know why I say that every video as if we're not normally here. But today is actually part 2 of the back tier list. I'm not gonna lie, it's not gonna be as fun as the last one, so I quite like the lats. I think lats are pretty cool, but today it's actually gonna be the upper back. I'm gonna put a disclaimer out there now. With the upper back tier list we're doing today, I am gonna include rear delts as well. It's fundamentally, a lot of upper back work will heavily involve and recruit the rear delts. Therefore, it makes sense to kind of pair them together. And again, I'm gonna say it so you don't forget, just because I haven't included a movement doesn't mean it's not good or potentially even bad. I'm just trying to limit how many movements are included per tier list to, let's say, 10 to 15, 10 to 12. Because if I do more than that, it's gonna be an hour-long video. So, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go through the movements, I'm gonna show you the movements, I'm gonna tell you why I maybe like them, I'm gonna tell you why I maybe dislike them, and I'm gonna explain my opinion. Now, that's key to remember here, is that everything I'm saying throughout this video is simply my opinion. Doesn't mean you have to align with it, doesn't mean you have to agree with it, and I fully encourage you to form your own opinion, and even to let me know in the comment section below how wrong you think I am, because I would appreciate some friendly abuse online. First movement on the list, not by order of effectiveness or preference, they're simply done in the order in which I wrote them down, so just note that. The T-bar row, a couple of variants here. You can either do this without chest support and with chest support. The without chest support is obviously with a barbell. I don't like that one because, quite frankly, the lack of chest support means that your lower back is going to get absolutely hammered. And I mentioned this when speaking about the barbell rows in the previous video, as my lower back quickly becomes a limiting factor, prevents me from training the target musculature, the upper/mid back in this case, as effectively because I'm being held back by an external variable which I want to try and remove. So, a chest supported T-bar row in which you're removing the lower back fatigue as a potential external variable that could hold you back is bloody fantastic in my opinion. The one thing I like about this variant in particular, shout out Watson, one of the few good machines you actually make, is that you can alter your arm angle depending on what you want to work. Because the handles are very adjustable, and a lot of T-bar rows do have adjustable handles or varying handles to choose from, you can alter whether you want to shift a bit more emphasis to the upper back, maybe a little bit of mid back and rear delts, or sometimes even rear delts depending on what options you have available. Like I said, the chest support here allows you to remove or reduce the external variables that could hinder the effectiveness of the movement and allow you to shift as much emphasis over to the upper back or mid back, depending on what you want to tickle, as possible. For that reason, I'd actually call this a bloody S-tier movement, in my opinion, because it's slippery like a sausage. Yeah, wide grip low row, or wide grip cable row. Again, the thing I like about this is that it is a relatively stable movement, as obviously your feet are planted. Very nice, very nice. The downside is, which is gonna be quite a common theme when it comes to back training in general, especially upper back, is that your lower back does potentially risk being a limiting factor. And in that, depending on your fatigue points and how strong your lower back is or isn't, mine isn't, then that can prevent you from taking the target musculature as close to failure as you might desire. For me, funnily enough, when I do like a T-bar row barbell, I have issues. When I do a seated cable row, I don't have issues. So that's something to note. You may be different. One of the things we're looking at when really trying to drive as much emphasis to the upper back as possible, actually two things. What is your upper arm doing? So what is the angle of the armpit here? So again, the higher and higher up the upper arm is, the more and more emphasis you're shifting to the upper back. What we typically like to do is lats down here, and again, this goes more to like mid back, then we shift over to upper back as you come higher up. When looking at upper back row specifically, I look for about 60 to 90 degrees at the armpit, give or take. It's not that deep, it's not gonna make or break things, but that's just a kind of rough ballpark I aim for. And the second thing we want to consider is retracting the shoulder blades. This isn't as much of a consideration when looking at lat bias movements, but when looking at upper back, mid back, traps, things like that, we want to think about pulling the shoulder blades back as far as we can and milking as much retraction as possible. It's gonna help shift that emphasis to the upper back and take all of the relevant muscles of the upper back and mid back, traps, rhomboids, rear delts, etc., through a relevant range of motion. So for that reason, the wide grip low row or wide grip cable row, however you want to tickle it, I'd probably list it as an A-tier movement. Same machine, and it's going to be similar to what I mentioned before in the lat bias video, in which we're going to do a similar movement, but this time we're actually going to include a mag grip. All of the previous points addressed still apply about how you can alter essentially where the emphasis is being placed or where the bias is shifting based on your upper arm angle. Yes, we want to consider a lot of retraction. And I know a lot of people will jump onto mag grips or grips that allow you to hold slightly differently, but the issue that I still present with all of them remains the same. Eventually, I'd like to think, and actually would like to hope, your upper back muscles and back muscles in general will exceed the strength of your forearms and your grip strength. When that occurs, because of how the handles are set up, you can't actually implement things to help reduce the presence of that external variable, being grip limitations. Therefore, grip is going to be a limiting factor. If you could utilize straps, one might argue it could be fantastic, but the fact is you can't. And without utilizing straps, eventually your grip will give out first. And if your grip is giving out first, you are simply holding yourself back and preventing yourself from taking the target musculature, mid-back, upper back, wherever you want to tickle, to, if not close to failure. Therefore, how effective that movement is for that target musculature gets limited due to the presence of that external variable. Literally just altering grip and altering handle use can turn this from an A tier movement, to be honest, I'd probably say more like a C or D tier movement, purely because eventually your grip will give out. And when it does give out, how hard can you push it and how close can you take it to failure when looking at the relevant muscles actually failing? But I think if I had to isolate just to one tier, I would probably say a C tier movement, simply because the grip issue may not impact everybody, and that's a key thing to note. So next on the agenda, a chest-supported machine row, pin-loaded row, whatever you want to call it. This one specifically is a Cybex machine, and that's relevant because they've betrayed me here. So the chest-supported machine row is fantastic. It basically takes a Y-grip, low row, cable row, whatever you want to call it, from earlier, and removes the external variable of lower back fatigue and lack of lower back support. Because it is chest supported like the T-bar row, you are reducing how much the lower back is actually involved, reduce the impact of that external variable, preventing you from taking the target musculature to failure. We like that because less external variables to consider means you can place more emphasis where you want to place it. Good, very nice. That's all well and good. But the fact is, there are two variations of this machine, I believe. There's one in which the handles are fixed and they do not move. There's one in which the handles are not fixed and they flap around like Flappy Bird. That's the variation we have here. For lat movements, this is fantastic. It's a lovely machine. When it comes to upper back movements, quite frankly, they've taken a really good machine and what was fantastic with the fixed handles and made it crap. Nobody's rowing like that, nobody's moving like that. And because the arms move so freely, half of the emphasis gets put not on you actually training and pushing the upper back to failure, but trying not to send your arms into oblivion, basically. So for that reason, I'm actually very disappointed because, again, you've taken a good thing and made it bad. Sure, someone might argue, oh, it's better for the rear delts because it adopts more of like a fly-like motion or reverse fly motion. I don't care. There are better alternatives for the rear delts anyway. And quite frankly, although it's very good for the lats, it's not very good for the upper back. And you've taken what would have actually been like an S tier movement and actually arguably made it a D tier movement. D for disappointing because it was good and now it's bad. There we go. I can't start unless Taylor says when, otherwise it feels wrong and I'm incomplete. Taylor completes me. It's going to be a controversial one because Athlean X lovers are going to be upset. The rope face pull, I'll say it to you straight. When it comes to up back development, when considering hypertrophy, when it comes to rear delt development, considering hypertrophy, it is crap. Straight away, D tier movement, throw it in the bin. So a lot of people actually incorporate rope face pulls primarily for rear delts. When we're looking at rear delts, we're kind of looking at bringing the arm down a bit more at 45 degrees. When I'm doing a rope face pull, you'll notice my upper arm is not down at 45 degrees. It's actually nearer 90 degrees or even higher sometimes, maybe up to 120, in which you're pulling up like so. That is the opposite direction in which we're looking to train the rear delts. So for that reason, immediately, pretty crap. But there's a but here. Most of the videos on my channel, or if not all of them, are very much focused around the realm of hypertrophy, building muscle, and also getting stronger. We like that. It's key to note that just because a movement doesn't have a place, in my opinion, when it comes to hypertrophy, doesn't mean it can't be utilized elsewhere. The one thing the rope face pull does really well is it encourages a lot of external rotation, which is this motion here. In doing so, I found that obviously it brings in a lot of the rotator cuff muscles, which we like. I found, especially when doing a lot of pressing, it can be a really good movement when looking at shoulder health and helping prevent potential injuries. More of like, I don't like using the term, but I'm going to use the term like a prehab movement, if anything. Although it may not be great for hypertrophy, due to the fact that the upper arm angle is going the wrong way, it is good for shoulder health. It was something I included regularly when I was bench pressing 4 times a week to keep my shoulders healthy and not make them want to feel like they were going to explode every day. So for hypertrophy, I say D for, I've used this word before, but I'm going to use it again, diabolical. When it comes to shoulder health, we'll say, probably A, S, and might throw in a second S to make it ass, even though it's not an ass movement. Next on the agenda, shifting again to rear delts. The cable, reverse fly, rear delt fly, whatever you want to call it. Someone's going to pipe up and say, oh, but Harry, it's not a very stable movement, you don't have lower back support, you don't have chest support, things like that. Sometimes I don't think you need it. I'm relatively strong compared to my mum, but ultimately I'm not shifting so much weight on a rear delt fly that I'm getting thrown around the place because I'm also relatively heavy. If that is a potential limiter for you, what you can easily do is chest support it with a bench or even sit on a bench. I don't feel like I need to, so I don't. But the thing I like about the cable rear delt fly is it gives your upper arm the freedom to go through the range of motion it wants to go through. And this is going to be dependent on the person and what you're trying to achieve. Because again, you're not following a fixed path, you can come down a bit lower, come down a little bit higher. You can alter the movement and adjust the machine according to what potentially aligns best with what you're trying to achieve. Although I don't always put a lot of emphasis on sensation, because just because you can't feel something doesn't mean a muscle isn't working. Sometimes, depending on your training experience, I would say, feeling a movement to a certain extent just gives you that little bit of security and certainty that you're doing something potentially right. Sure, I can make bad movements feel really good, but if nothing else, it can help encourage slightly better movement patterns, just so you know what you're trying to feel and how you're trying to feel it. Is it something I'd worry too much about when considering hypertrophy? No, my muscle connection is not something I place massive amounts of emphasis on, but I've also been training for a long time. The one thing I will notice, one of the biggest hindrances when looking at cable reverse flies is the fact that your grip can actually fatigue here and you can't really strap up. What you can do if your gym has access to them is use wrist cuffs. This eliminates your hands to an extent, and therefore eliminating grip as a potential weakness, which means you can then remove external variables and shift as much emphasis to the target musculature as possible without those potential external variables holding you back, which is what we like to see. And that's one of the big considerations I keep in mind when looking at how effective a movement is or isn't for hypertrophy. I'm probably going to call the cable rear delt fly an A-tier movement. The lack of S comes from the lack of stability, but it's still a movement I do regularly, and arguably it's actually probably one of my favorite rear delt movements, even though it's not quite an S tier, although it is on the fence, I would say. The incline dumbbell row. Again, one of the great things about this movement is you can adjust the upper arm angle depending on what you want to achieve. But I would typically do this with a 45-degree upper arm angle, more for the mid-back, rear delt sort of thing, but it really depends. It's a tricky one, because although it's a great movement, it's very stable, a lot of support because you're lying face down on a bench, therefore implementing a lot of chest support, reducing the lower back as an external variable, that could be a concern, and also because you can strap up, you can reduce grip as another external variable, there are a few drawbacks. And one of the big things I see people doing incorrectly here is they will lie where their chin is hanging over the end of the bench. You don't want to do that. Firstly, it batters your ability to breathe, and secondly, it can also reduce your range of motion. What I typically like to do is slide up so my chest is a bit more supported. I'm hanging somewhat over the bench, means I can get a slightly better stretch at the bottom and go through a slightly better range of motion throughout the entire movement, which I quite like. The issue with that is if you do have, for lack of a better term, boobs, like myself, it can become quite tender and can be quite uncomfortable, which presents a really annoying external variable that could potentially render the movement useless for you. Another consideration is if your arms aren't very long, like mine, my arms are actually relatively short, it's really hard to actually get in position, and you end up having to set up a whole bloody mousetrap of movements just to try and get the dumbbells into position with straps. So if you have a friend with you, that can be fantastic, or have access to like a box in which you can rest the dumbbells on, fantastic. But if you're on your own, your ability to go heavy on this movement, again, heavy and strength are both relative, can become greatly limited due to the fact that you actually can't strap up onto dumbbells properly, as your arms may not reach the floor, which is the issue I face, and that's actually why I don't implement this movement myself. Do I implement it for clients? Yes, because a lot of them don't have the issues I have, but if you do have issues, and some of them do, we remove it and swap it for a machine or cable variation instead. Due to the aforementioned points, if getting in position genuinely wasn't an issue, and also boob tenderness potentially, I'd call it an S-tier movement, it's fantastic. But the fact that it is an issue, I'd probably bring it down to a B-tier movement. B for boob. Nearly the end of the video now, but we're looking at another rear delt movement. So this time, obviously many of you are familiar with the pec deck fly. It's something that's going to be featured in our chest video, but a lot of people actually do a reverse pec deck fly in which they flip around 180 and essentially do a rear delt fly on the pec deck machine. A couple of things there. One of the points I mentioned earlier about the cable rear fly is the fact that lower back is the fact that stability could be a slight issue because again you have no support. This removes that because it's seated and chest supported. Very nice. The issue with this is the arm path is fixed. You have to raise with relatively high levels of abduction, which the upper arm is quite high, nearer the 90-degree mark. Yes, the rear delts are still heavily utilized when moving with such a flare, but I do find personally, again, just my preference and what I've noticed, that the rear delts tend to be best worked when bringing your arms more down at 45 degrees, which the cable rear delt fly does allow, whereas the pec deck reverse fly doesn't. And that presents as a potential hindrance, although I don't think it's enough of a hindrance for me to say which one is definitively better or worse. I think they're equally as good as each other for different reasons. The back pad on this, or the chest pad, depending on how you define it, is quite high, which means every time I do it, I end up kissing the pad, and sometimes, depending on who's been on it before, it's not something I want to kiss because I've smelt some things on that pad and it's brought back some troubling memories of all boys school. I'd probably say this is on par with the cable reverse fly, and this is also an A-tier movement. Both of them are good, but for different reasons. A for alternate or alternative. Well, that works. That's very good, actually. A movement that was actually previously mentioned in the previous video, in which I believe I incorporated underhand grip barbell row, as that's heavily utilized for the lats. This time we're going to include an overhand grip barbell row. Similar movement, different variation. Again, underhand grip essentially encourages your upper arm to be a bit closer to the body, which then shifts a bit more emphasis to the lats. Overhand grip encourages the upper arm to flare from the body, so abduction, which then shifts a bit more emphasis to the upper back, mid back, etc., etc. All of the issues presented throughout that previous video still apply here. The barbell row for some people is fantastic. I know a lot of people swear by it, and I think it probably has more of a place for upper back than it does for lats. When I spoke about it before, when you're supinated, the biceps are more heavily involved. Again, that's an additional weakness that may not be as present when looking at an overhand grip, so that's one to consider. The big issue here still applies is when you go heavy enough, eventually your lower back is going to fatigue, and the lack of chest support essentially reduces how effective this movement is when considering optimizing hypertrophy. And when I look at optimizing hypertrophy, the key thing to remember there is nuance is a thing you need to consider. I had this conversation with someone actually at the gym earlier, great conversation. And the other thing you have to consider, this is all very much focused and based on how a movement targets certain muscles with as few external limiters as possible. Just because it may be a D-tier movement, whatever, doesn't mean it's not good and doesn't mean it doesn't have application. Every movement has application, and sometimes that application can simply be because you enjoy it. You have to remember is that these considerations of external weaknesses and limiters are things that I am presenting based on my own experience and my own opinion. My lower back fatiguing may not be your lower back fatiguing, and if your lower back doesn't fatigue for this movement, it may actually be a B-tier movement for you, although I might call it a C or a D-tier movement. Purely for argument's sake, I think if I've included the underhand grip lat bias row as a D-tier movement for the lats, I was going to put this as a D-tier movement as well, but due to the fact there are slightly less external variables limiting you, I'm tempted to actually shift this up to C-tier because I don't think it's fair for me to put them in the same bracket when this one is arguably less influenced by external variables as the previous one. Do you want to see my calves? I'll put my socks up so it makes it look a little bit bigger. The classic era, behind the neck pull down. So many people back in the day used to speak about how they would incorporate the behind the neck pull down purely because they wanted to then shift a bit more emphasis to the upper back, as apparently when you were doing a pull down in front of the neck, it was more lat, etc., etc. That's crap, gonna be honest with you. The behind the neck pull down, sure, is a fine movement if you want to do it. If you have the shoulder mobility to do it and it doesn't cause any issues, you absolutely can. What the upper arm is doing does not change. When you're doing a lat pull down, your upper arm is going through high levels of adduction. One of the ranges of motion we're looking at when looking at lat development is going to be adduction of the upper arm. Adduction of the upper arm in the frontal plane shifts a lot of emphasis to the lats. When you do a pull down in front of the neck or behind the neck, you're still going through adduction in the frontal plane, therefore shifting a lot of emphasis to the lats. Is there an argument that you might include some upper back work in there through maybe some slight retraction, whatever it may be? Absolutely, you can argue that, but doesn't change the fact that fundamentally it is still primarily a lat dominant movement and not primarily an upper back dominant movement. If you're looking at the upper back, we're looking more towards row-based movements, especially with high levels of abduction, not high levels of adduction. Abduction is this, adduction is this. I'd actually slap this as a D-tier movement because it doesn't target what you want it to target as effectively as you think it might. That is the video. That is the end of the back series part of the tier list. Again, I mentioned at the start, these are just based on my opinion. I presented my yays and my nays and why. Doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It's simply based on my opinion, which is taken not just from research, but also from anecdotal evidence and personal experiences. Things to remember, not only have I experienced many of these issues myself and experienced great results with many of these movements myself, I've also seen my clients face issues, experience great results, etc., etc. So I try and combine that all into one before forming an opinion. That's the thing. Science is great. I love science. We love theory. We love papers. Fantastic. But nuance is a thing there, as is anecdotal evidence and experience, things that people commonly neglect. So just because you may not agree with my opinion doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong, doesn't mean you're right or wrong. Simply opinion versus opinion, and that's absolutely fine. If we all shared the same opinion, we probably wouldn't learn much because we wouldn't go exploring for more answers. Regardless, I would appreciate if you let me know your favorite upper back movement in the comment section below and tell me why. I'm just curious. Until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle about the upper back, and thank you for tolerating the video. Like, share, comment, subscribe. TFNL coaching is always linked down below in the description as well as the comment section. So fill in the application form. I'll send you an email. We'll hop on a free Zoom consultation call where we can talk about how we can get you to whatever goals you may want to achieve wherever you are in the world, be that home or at the gym. I'm waffling as much as I can without breathing, and I'm struggling. Yes.